I died in room 237 of the Riverside Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago 3 months ago, but somehow I'm still here to tell you about it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like you've experienced something that defied all logic, because what happened to me that October night will challenge everything you think you know about life, death, and what exists in between. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I was just a regular 34-year-old marketing consultant from Denver, Colorado. Nothing special about me. I paid my taxes, called my mom every Sunday, and my biggest fear used to be giving presentations to clients. I had absolutely no belief in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. That skepticism almost cost me my soul. It was October 15th, 2024, and I was flying into Chicago for a 3-day marketing conference at McCormick Place. My company had booked me a room at what they called a historic downtown hotel, the Riverside Grand. When I researched it online, the place looked elegant enough. Built in 1923, it had that old-world charm that business travelers either love or hate. The lobby photos showed marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and rich mahogany furnishings. It looked like the kind of place where Chicago's elite used to conduct business deals over cigars and whiskey. The flight from Denver was routine, but I remember feeling unusually anxious as we descended into O'Hare. There was this strange sensation in my chest, like someone was pressing down on my ribcage. I attributed it to work stress. This conference was crucial for a promotion I'd been chasing for 2 years. I had 3 major client presentations scheduled, and everything had to be perfect. The cab ride into downtown Chicago should have been my first warning. The driver, an older gentleman with silver hair and tired eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror when I gave him the hotel address. "The Riverside Grand, huh?" he said, his voice carrying an odd inflection. "You sure about that address, buddy?" "Yeah, that's what my company booked," I replied, not thinking much of it. "Is there something wrong with the hotel?" He was quiet for a long moment, navigating through the evening traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. The Chicago skyline stretched before us, all glass and steel reaching toward a cloudy October sky. If you're not comfortable there are plenty of other hotels in the loop. Nice ones." I laughed it off. "Thanks for the concern, but I'm sure it'll be fine. How bad can a hotel be, right?" The driver didn't respond, but I caught him looking at me in the mirror again, and there was something in his expression that made my skin crawl. It was the same look someone might give to a person walking unknowingly toward a cliff edge. The Riverside Grand Hotel stood on West Randolph Street, wedged between a modern office building and an upscale steakhouse. From the outside, it looked exactly like the photos. Impressive limestone facade, brass fixtures, and large windows that gleamed in the streetlights. The building rose 15 floors into the Chicago sky, with decorative gargoyles perched at various points along the exterior. In daylight, those gargoyles probably looked charming. In the evening shadows, they looked like sentinels watching everyone who entered. The lobby lived up to its online reputation. Polished marble floors reflected the warm light from genuine crystal chandeliers. The mahogany front desk was staffed by a woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled brown hair and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, brass mailboxes and key hooks covered the wall, giving the place an authentic vintage feel that modern hotels try to replicate, but never quite achieve. "Welcome to the Riverside Grand," she said as I approached with my rolling suitcase. "Checking in?" "Yes, Marcus Thompson. I should have a reservation for 3 nights." She typed efficiently on her computer, her manicured nails clicking against the keys. "Here we are, Mr. Thompson. We have you in room 237. That's on our 2nd floor, easily accessible by the elevator or stairs." As she handed me the old-fashioned brass key, not a key card, but an actual metal key, her fingers brushed mine, and they were ice cold. "Is everything all right with the heating system?" I asked. "Your hands are freezing." Her smile flickered for just a moment. "The building can get a bit chilly, especially on the higher floors. Room 237 should be comfortable, though. It's one of our quieter rooms." Something about the way she emphasized quieter made me pause, but I was tired from traveling and focused on getting settled in for the night. "Great, thanks. What time does the restaurant close?" "The restaurant stops serving at 10 p.m., but room service is available 24 hours if you need anything during the night. Anything at all." Again, that emphasis that seemed to carry hidden meaning. I thanked her and headed toward the elevator, my suitcase wheels echoing across the marble floor. The hotel lobby had a few other guests scattered in the leather armchairs, reading newspapers or working on laptops, but the place felt unusually quiet for a downtown Chicago hotel on a Tuesday evening. No conversations, no laughter, just the soft sound of pages turning and the distant hum of the city outside. The elevator was one of those old-fashioned cage-style lifts with brass fixtures and a manual gate that you had to close before pressing the floor button. As I stepped inside and pulled the gate shut, I noticed a small brass plaque next to the floor buttons that I hadn't seen from outside. In memory of our guests who have made the Riverside Grand their eternal home, 1923 present. That was odd phrasing for a hotel memorial, but old buildings often have quirky historical touches. I pressed the button for the second floor and felt the elevator lurch upward with mechanical groans that spoke of decades of faithful service. The second-floor hallway was dimly lit by wall sconces that cast long shadows between the room doors. The carpet was thick and burgundy, with an intricate pattern that seemed to shift slightly in my peripheral vision as I walked toward room 237. The walls were covered in dark wood paneling, and oil paintings of Chicago landmarks from the early 1900s hung at regular intervals. It should have felt elegant and historical, but instead, there was something oppressive about the narrow corridor. Room 237 was at the end of the hall, across from what appeared to be a utility closet and next to an emergency exit stairwell. The brass numbers on the door were tarnished with age, and I noticed that while every other room door in the hallway had a small brass nameplate below the room number, room 237's nameplate was missing. In its place was just a slightly darker rectangle of wood where something had once been mounted. I slid the key into the lock and it turned with surprising ease. The door swung open to reveal a spacious room that exceeded my expectations. A king-size bed dominated the space, covered in crisp white linens and a burgundy comforter that matched the hallway carpet. Heavy curtains framed a large window that offered a view of downtown Chicago's glittering lights. A mahogany desk sat beneath the window, and a comfortable-looking armchair was positioned near a small table with a vintage lamp. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something sweet, but with an underlying metallic note that reminded me of old pennies. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and walked to the window to take in the view. Chicago spread out below me, all lights and movement and life. I could see people walking on the sidewalks, cars navigating the streets, the warm glow of restaurant windows, and the pulse of a city that never truly sleeps. It was beautiful and comforting. A reminder that I was surrounded by millions of other people going about their normal Tuesday night routines. I unpacked my laptop and conference materials, laying out my presentation notes on the desk. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The room was clean, comfortable, and quiet. Exactly what I needed for a good night's sleep before 3 days of intense business meetings. I ordered a sandwich and a beer from room service, planning to review my presentations one more time before bed. The room service waiter who delivered my food was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with nervous eyes and hands that shook slightly as he set up my meal on the small table. "Will there be anything else, sir?" he asked, but his eyes kept darting around the room as if he was looking for something or someone. "No, this looks perfect. Thank you." I handed him a tip and he practically ran from the room, closing the door with unnecessary force behind him. I ate my sandwich while reviewing my client presentations, making small notes and adjustments. The sandwich was excellent. Roast beef with horseradish sauce on fresh bread, and the beer was ice cold. Everything was exactly as it should be. I felt good about my preparations and confident about the next 3 days. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I first noticed something unusual. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I heard what sounded like someone walking in the hallway outside my room. That wasn't unusual in itself. Hotels have guests coming and going at all hours. But these footsteps were different. They were slow, deliberate, and they stopped directly outside my door. I waited for the sound of a key in a lock, or footsteps continuing down the hall, but there was nothing, just silence. Then, after about 30 seconds, the footsteps resumed, moving away from my door and back down the hallway. I finished brushing my teeth and thought nothing more of it. I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed with my phone, planning to check emails one more time before sleeping. The bed was incredibly comfortable, with high-quality linens that felt smooth against my skin. The pillows were perfectly fluffed, and the mattress provided just the right amount of support. I was settling in for what I expected to be a great night's sleep when I heard it again. Those same slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. This time, I muted my phone and listened carefully. The footsteps approached my door, paused for about 30 seconds, then continued down the hall. A few minutes later, they returned, following the exact same pattern. Step, 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 pause outside room 237, then step, step, step away. Hit the like button if this story is already giving you chills, because what happened next changed everything. I thought I knew about reality. Paragraph 2. Paranormal activity escalation. 2,000 words. The footsteps continued for exactly 1 hour, following the same precise pattern every 3 minutes. I know because I started timing them on my phone. Each sequence was identical. Slow approach, 30-second pause outside my door, slow retreat, then silence for exactly 3 minutes before the cycle repeated. By 12:30 a.m., my rational mind was working overtime trying to explain what I was hearing. Maybe it was a security guard making rounds, though the timing seemed obsessively regular for human behavior. Maybe it was another guest with insomnia, pacing the halls. Maybe the old building's heating system was making sounds that resembled footsteps. I'd stayed in plenty of old hotels, and they all had their quirks. But then the footsteps stopped completely, and something much worse began. At 12:47 a.m., I remember the exact time because I was staring at my phone when it happened. The temperature in room 237 dropped at least 15 degrees in the span of about 10 seconds. I went from being comfortably warm under the covers to seeing my breath fog in the air. The change was so dramatic and sudden that I actually sat up in bed, thinking maybe a window had somehow opened or the air conditioning had malfunctioned. I got out of bed to check the thermostat on the wall near the door. It was set to 72 degrees, same as when I'd adjusted it earlier. But the digital display now read 56 degrees and was continuing to drop even as I watched. 55 degrees, 54 degrees, 53 degrees. The metallic smell I'd noticed earlier was getting stronger, mixed now with something that reminded me of wet concrete and old flowers. I walked to the window to see if it had somehow come open, but it was securely closed and locked. The curtains weren't moving at all. There was no draft, no air circulation that would explain the sudden temperature plunge. That's when I heard the first whisper. It was so faint that I almost missed it. Just a soft sound that might have been the building settling or steam in the pipes. But as I stood perfectly still in the middle of the room, straining to listen, I heard it again. It was definitely a human voice, though I couldn't make out any words. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. Not from the walls or the ceiling or the floor, but from the air itself. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because what I experienced next defied every rational explanation I could think of. The whisper gradually became clearer, and I realized it was saying the same word over and over. Stay, stay, stay. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It had a hollow quality, like someone speaking from the bottom of a deep well. I grabbed my phone and opened the voice recorder app, thinking that if I was losing my mind, at least I'd have some evidence of my mental breakdown. But when I played back the recording, there was nothing. Just silence and the sound of my own breathing. That's when I noticed the mirror. The large mirror above the mahogany dresser had been reflecting the room normally when I'd unpacked earlier. Now, standing in the freezing cold air, I could see that my reflection was there, but there were other shapes behind me. Shadowy figures that seemed to be standing right where I was standing, occupying the same space as my body. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room behind me was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadowy figures were gone, but my reflection looked different somehow. Paler, thinner, and my eyes looked hollow, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. I need to know in the comments if anyone else has experienced something like this, because the psychological impact was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Pure terror was coursing through my body, but there was also this strange sense of recognition, as if some part of me remembered being in this exact situation before. The whispers were getting louder and more numerous. What had started as a single voice saying, "Stay," had become a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, but somehow never drowning each other out. I could make out individual words now. Don't leave. You belong here. Join us. Room 237. Forever. I backed toward the door, fumbling for the brass key I'd left on the desk. The voices seemed to follow me, growing more insistent. The temperature had stabilized at what felt like about 45 degrees, cold enough that I was shivering violently in my pajamas, but not so cold that it felt dangerous. That's when the bathroom light turned on by itself. The bathroom was directly across from where I was standing, and I had a clear view through the open doorway. The light switch flicked up with an audible click, and warm yellow light spilled into the main room. I stood frozen, staring at the bathroom, waiting for someone to emerge, but no one did. Instead, I heard the sound of running water. The bathroom faucet had turned on full blast, and I could hear water splashing in the sink. But what made my blood run cold was that it didn't sound like clean water hitting porcelain. It sounded thick, viscous, like something with the consistency of syrup or blood. Let me know if you want me to continue this story, because I'm not sure I have the strength to relive what happened next. The bathroom mirror was reflecting something that wasn't there. In the bright bathroom light, I could see the reflection of the sink, the faucet, and the water running. But the water in the reflection was dark red, and there were hands, multiple pairs of hands, reaching up from the drain as if trying to climb out. I grabbed my key and phone and ran for the door, but the brass key wouldn't turn in the lock. I twisted it left and right, pulled it out and tried again, but the mechanism seemed to be frozen. The whispers behind me were getting louder, more demanding. "You can't leave. You're one of us now. Room 237 is your home." That's when I started calling for help. I shouted toward the door, hoping someone in the hallway would hear me, but my voice seemed to be absorbed by the air itself. Even to my own ears, my shout sounded muffled and distant, as if I were calling from inside a padded room. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal, not even emergency service bars. The screen showed full battery life, but where the carrier signal should have been, there was just nothing. I tried calling 911 anyway, but the call wouldn't connect. The phone acted as if it were in airplane mode, even though all my settings showed it should be working normally. The water in the bathroom was still running, and now I could hear other sounds coming from in there. Footsteps on the tile floor, the sound of someone, or something, moving around. But when I looked through the doorway, the bathroom appeared empty except for that dark water flowing from the faucet and those ghostly hands reaching up from the drain in the mirror's reflection. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories like this one, because I promise you, this is only the beginning of what happened in room 237. I realized I had two choices: stay in the main room with the whispers and the freezing air and whatever was happening in that bathroom, or try to get out through the window. We were only on the second floor, a drop that might be survivable if I could figure out how to open the window. I rushed to the window and examined the latch mechanism. It was an old-style window with multiple locking points, but after a few moments of fumbling with cold, shaking hands, I managed to get it open. The October night air felt warm compared to the supernatural cold inside room 237. I looked down at the street below. It was about a 20-foot drop to the sidewalk, definitely dangerous, but not necessarily fatal if I landed right. There were a few late-night pedestrians walking along West Randolph Street, and I considered calling down to them for help. But when I opened my mouth to shout, no sound came out at all. Not muffled like before, but complete silence. I tried again, taking a deep breath and putting all my effort into screaming for help, but it was as if my vocal cords had been disconnected. That's when I realized the whispers had stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the voices had been. The bathroom light was still on and I could still hear the water running, but the temperature in the room had returned to normal and the overwhelming sense of presence had vanished. I stood at the open window, cold night air on my face, wondering if I had imagined the entire experience. Maybe it had been a nightmare, or a panic attack, or some kind of psychological break brought on by work stress. Maybe the old building's heating system really had malfunctioned, and my exhausted mind had filled in supernatural explanations for perfectly normal sounds. I was actually starting to convince myself that I'd overreacted when I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The brass key in the door lock was turning, slowly, deliberately, from the inside. The key that I had been unable to turn just minutes earlier was now rotating smoothly, and I heard the lock mechanism clicking open. The door handle began to turn, and the heavy wooden door started to swing inward. But there was no one there. The door opened to reveal the empty hallway, dimly lit by those wall sconces, exactly as it had been when I'd arrived. But standing in that doorway, looking out at the burgundy carpet and the oil paintings and the normal hotel corridor, I knew with absolute certainty that room 237 was not a normal hotel room. And I knew that whoever, or whatever, had just unlocked that door from the inside was still in the room with me. Paragraph 3. Supernatural presence. Confirmation and intensification. 2,000 words. I stood at that open doorway for what felt like an eternity. My bare feet on the threshold between room 237 and the hallway, cold air from the room mixing with the normal temperature of the corridor. The brass key was still in the lock, still warm to the touch as if human fingers had been turning it moments before. The hallway looked exactly as it should. Normal hotel carpet, normal lighting, normal silence of a building where most guests were asleep. But I could feel something behind me in room 237, something that was waiting for me to make a decision. Stay or go. Close the door or step through it. I chose to step into the hallway. The moment my feet touched the burgundy carpet outside the room, every door in the corridor slammed shut simultaneously. The sound was like thunder rolling through the building. Bang, 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 bang. At least 20 doors closing with such force that the walls shook. The oil paintings rattled in their frames, and the light fixtures swayed from the impact. Then silence. I ran toward the elevator, but when I pressed the call button, nothing happened. The indicator lights showed the elevator car was stopped on the 7th floor, and no matter how many times I jabbed the button, it wouldn't move. I tried the emergency stairwell next to room 237, but the door wouldn't budge. Not locked. The handle turned freely, but the door itself seemed to be held shut by some immense force. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments, because I need to know I'm not the only person who's experienced something like this level of supernatural intervention. That's when I heard my name being called. Marcus. It came from inside room 237, spoken in a voice I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. Marcus, come back inside. I pressed myself against the wall opposite the door, as far from room 237 as I could get in the narrow hallway. The voice called again, and this time I realized why it sounded familiar. It was my own voice, but speaking in a tone I'd never used, with an inflection that was somehow both inviting and menacing. Marcus, you can't stay out there. This is your room. This is your home. The brass key in the door lock began to turn again, locking the door from the inside. Then I heard footsteps. My footsteps, I was certain of it, walking around inside the room, moving from the door to the window, then to the bathroom, then to the bed. The same pattern I'd followed when I'd first entered the room hours earlier. I could hear my own voice inside the room, having a conversation with someone I couldn't hear. Yes, it's very comfortable. The view is excellent. No, I don't think I'll be checking out tomorrow. Actually, I don't think I'll be checking out at all. The psychological terror of hearing your own voice speaking words you never said, expressing thoughts you never had, is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. It's a violation that goes deeper than physical fear. It's an attack on your sense of self, your understanding of where you end and the world begins. I pounded on the door of room 235, the room next to mine. Help! Please, someone help me! But my voice was working normally now, and I was shouting as loudly as I could. No one answered. I tried room 239 on the other side. Nothing. I ran down the hallway, pounding on every door, screaming for help, but it was as if the entire second floor was empty, except for whatever was impersonating me inside room 237. Let me know if you want a part 2 to this story, because what happened next proved that the supernatural entity in room 237 wasn't just trying to scare me, it was trying to replace me entirely. I reached the end of the hallway, where it intersected with another corridor. This part of the hotel was laid out in a T-shape, with rooms extending in both directions. I chose to go left, hoping to find another elevator or stairwell, anything that might get me off the second floor. But after walking for what should have been about 30 seconds, I found myself back at the original corridor, standing in front of room 237 again. The hallway had somehow looped back on itself, defying the building's physical architecture. I tried going right at the intersection. Same result. No matter which direction I walked, every corridor led back to room 237. That's when I realized I could hear voices coming from multiple rooms now. Not just room 237, but from rooms 235, 239, 241, and others. Different voices, but all of them sounded like people who were having normal hotel conversations, calling for room service, talking on phones, watching television. The problem was, I had pounded on those doors just minutes earlier, and they had been silent and empty. I pressed my ear to the door of room 235 and listened. Inside, I could hear a woman's voice. Yes, I'd like to extend my stay indefinitely. No checkout date. This is my home now. Room 239. A man's voice, cheerful and conversational. The room is perfect, absolutely perfect. I never want to leave. Why would anyone ever want to leave? Room 241. A child's voice, singing softly. Check in, but never check out. Room 237 is what it's all about. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content like this, because I realized I was listening to the voices of everyone who had ever disappeared from room 237. I understood now why the cab driver had looked at me with such concern, why the desk clerk had emphasized that room 237 was quiet, why the room service waiter had been so nervous. Room 237 wasn't just haunted, it was a collection point for souls, and everyone who worked at the Riverside Grand Hotel knew it. The entity in room 237 would take a new guest, replace them with some supernatural duplicate, and add the original person's soul to its collection. The duplicate would check out normally, return to their regular life, and no one would ever know that the real person was trapped forever in a hotel room that existed partially outside normal reality. I tried to remember if I'd noticed anything strange about my reflection earlier, before the supernatural activity had begun. Had I looked different somehow? Had my eyes already started to look hollow and empty? The voices from the other rooms were getting louder and more numerous. I could hear dozens of people now, all of them expressing satisfaction with their accommodations, all of them extending their stays indefinitely. Men, women, children, elderly people, generations of guests who had made the mistake of accepting room 237. And from room 237 itself, I could still hear my own voice, now talking to what sounded like a hotel employee. Yes, I'll be staying permanently. Please remove my name from all checkout schedules. Room 237 is exactly where I belong. I ran back to the window at the end of the hallway, thinking I might be able to break it and call for help from someone on the street. But when I looked outside, Chicago was gone. Instead of the downtown cityscape I'd seen from my room window, there was nothing but darkness. Not nighttime darkness. The complete absence of light, as if the hotel was floating in empty space. No buildings, no streets, no lights, no signs of human civilization at all. The hotel had somehow detached itself from reality, taking me with it. I was trapped on the second floor of a building that no longer existed in the normal world, surrounded by the voices of people who had been collected over decades, while something wearing my identity prepared to send a duplicate of me back to my life in Denver. Comment below what you think I should have done, because I was completely out of rational options. That's when I remembered something the desk clerk had said. Room service is available 24 hours if you need anything during the night. Anything at all. The way she had emphasized those words suddenly made sense. Room service wasn't just about food. It was a lifeline for guests who found themselves in supernatural trouble. I found a house phone on a small table at the end of the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial, but I managed to press 0 for the front desk. Front desk, this is Margaret. How can I help you? It was the same woman who had checked me in, and her voice sounded completely normal, professional, and helpful. This is Marcus Thompson in room 237. I need help. There's something wrong with my room. Something supernatural, and I can't get off the second floor. There was a pause, then, "Oh, Mr. Thompson. Yes, I was wondering when you'd call. Are you calling from the hallway phone? Yes, I'm in the corridor. I can't get back in my room, and I can't leave the floor. There's something in there pretending to be me. I understand completely, sir. This happens sometimes with room 237. Can you tell me exactly where you are right now?" The relief I felt at talking to someone who believed me, who understood what was happening, was overwhelming. I'm standing by the window at the end of the main corridor. I can see into room 237 from here, and there are lights on, but I know something else is in there. Perfect. Now, Mr. Thompson, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You have about 10 minutes before the replacement process is complete. After that, you'll become part of the hotel's permanent collection, and your duplicate will return to your normal life. Do you understand? My heart was pounding so hard I could barely speak. Yes, I understand. How do I stop it? You need to get back into room 237 and confront the entity directly. It's the only way to break the replacement process. But I can't get back in. The door is locked from the inside. Mr. Thompson, you still have your brass key, don't you? I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the key so tightly that it had left indentations in my palm. Yes, I have it. That key will work from the outside, but only if you truly want to reclaim your identity. The entity feeds on fear and resignation. You have to approach that door with absolute determination to take back what belongs to you. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because what I had to do next required more courage than I knew I possessed. Paragraph 4. The climax. Direct confrontation and supernatural terror. 2,000 words. I walked back toward room 237 with that brass key clutched in my hand like a weapon, every step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. The voices from the other rooms had grown quiet, as if every soul trapped in the hotel was holding its breath, waiting to see if I would join their eternal collection or somehow find a way to escape. The door to room 237 looked different now. The brass numbers seemed to be glowing with a faint, pulsing light that seemed to come from within the metal itself. The wood around the door frame looked darker, as if it were slowly being consumed by some kind of supernatural decay that spread outward like a stain. I could hear my own voice inside the room more clearly now, and what I heard made my stomach turn. The entity wasn't just impersonating me. It was living out a twisted version of my life, making phone calls to people I cared about. "Hi, Mom. It's Marcus," I heard my voice say through the door. I've decided to stay in Chicago permanently. No, don't worry about me, I've never been happier. I found exactly where I belong. The psychological horror of hearing something else use your voice to lie to your mother, to potentially cause her pain and confusion, filled me with a rage that burned through my terror. That thing was not just stealing my identity. It was poisoning my relationships, destroying the connections that made me who I was. I inserted the brass key into the lock, and this time it turned smoothly. But as the lock mechanism clicked open, the door didn't just swing inward. It dissolved, melting away like ice in hot water, until there was nothing but an archway of swirling darkness leading into what had once been room 237. The space beyond was no longer a hotel room. It was a vast, impossible chamber that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, and the walls curved away beyond the reach of any light source. But somehow, I could see everything with perfect clarity, as if the space itself was generating its own illumination. And I could see them all. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, standing motionless throughout the vast space. Men in business suits from different decades, women in dresses that spanned a century of fashion, children in clothing from the 1930s to the present day, all of them perfectly preserved, all of them staring at nothing with empty, hollow eyes. These were the guests who had stayed in room 237 over the past century. Each one had been replaced by the entity, and their real selves had been added to this collection of souls trapped in a space that existed between dimensions. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because I was looking at a supernatural museum of stolen identities. At the center of the vast chamber, I could see myself. Or rather, I could see the thing that was pretending to be me. It was sitting at a replica of the mahogany desk from the original room, speaking into a hotel phone with my voice, using my mannerisms. But there was something fundamentally wrong with its movements. They were too precise, too calculated, like someone performing a role they had studied but never truly understood. The entity, I realized, wasn't just one supernatural being. It was a collective consciousness made up of all the souls it had stolen over the decades. It learned how to be human by absorbing the personalities, memories, and identities of everyone it trapped. Each new guest made it more sophisticated, more convincing, more capable of sending perfect duplicates back into the world. But seeing all those people, all those stolen lives, also showed me something else. The entity wasn't invincible. It was a parasite that needed to feed on human consciousness to maintain its power. And right now, it was in the process of digesting my identity, which meant it was vulnerable. The fake version of me looked up from the phone call and saw me standing in the dissolved doorway. Its expression shifted into something that was almost my smile, but not quite. The proportions were wrong, the timing was off, and there was something predatory in the eyes that I had never possessed. "Marcus," it said in my voice, "you shouldn't be here. You should be sleeping peacefully while I take care of everything." "Give me back my life," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The entity wearing my face laughed, and it was my laugh but somehow hollow and mocking. "Your life? I'm living your life better than you ever did. I've already called your boss and negotiated a promotion. I've made dinner plans with that woman from accounting you've been too scared to ask out. I'm everything you could have been if you weren't so afraid. Hit the like button if this story is giving you chills because the entity was right about my fears, and that made its words cut deeper than any physical wound. You're nothing but a collection of stolen personalities," I said, walking further into the impossible chamber. "You don't have a life of your own, so you steal other people's." The fake Marcus stood up from the desk, and as it moved, I could see other faces flickering beneath its features like a television switching channels. A businessman from the 1950s, a young woman from the 1980s, a child from just a few years ago. All the identities it had absorbed over the decades were fighting for control of the surface. "I am all of them," it said, and now its voice was a chorus of every person it had ever replaced. "I am everything they were, and everything they could have been. I am more human than any single human could ever be." The trapped souls around us began to move, turning their hollow eyes toward our confrontation. They didn't walk. They glided across the floor like sleepwalkers, all moving in perfect synchronization toward where I stood. I realized they weren't just observers. They were part of the entity's defense system. "You can join them willingly," the collective voice continued, "or we can take you by force. Either way, your identity belongs to us now." That's when I remembered something Margaret at the front desk had said. "That key will work from the outside, but only if you truly want to reclaim your identity." The brass key was still in my hand, still warm from the lock. But it wasn't just a key to room 237. It was a key to my own sense of self. The entity could only complete the replacement process if I gave up, if I accepted that it was better at being me than I was. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories like this one, because what I did next was the most terrifying thing I've ever attempted. I looked at all those trapped souls, all those people who had given up their identities to this supernatural parasite, and I made a decision that went against every survival instinct in my body. I ran toward the fake version of myself. The entity wasn't expecting direct confrontation. It had been counting on my fear, my sense of inadequacy, my willingness to believe that it could live my life better than I could. But as I charged across the impossible floor of that interdimensional chamber, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Absolute certainty about who I was. I was Marcus Thompson from Denver, Colorado. I called my mom every Sunday because I loved her, not because it was an obligation. I was scared to ask out the woman from accounting because rejection hurt, but that vulnerability was part of what made me human. I wasn't perfect, I wasn't fearless, but I was real in ways that this collection of stolen identities could never be. The fake Marcus tried to sidestep my charge, but I tackled it around the waist and we both crashed to the floor. The moment I made physical contact with the entity, every stolen soul in the chamber screamed at once, a sound like the world ending, like reality itself being torn apart. The entity's face began to shift and change rapidly, cycling through dozens of different identities as it tried to maintain control. But my hands were around its throat, and I could feel something deeper than flesh beneath my fingers. I could feel the core of stolen consciousness that held the whole collection together. "I am Marcus Thompson," I shouted over the screaming of the trapped souls. "I am not perfect, but I am real, and you cannot have my life." The brass key in my hand grew burning hot, and I realized what I had to do. This wasn't just about reclaiming my own identity. It was about freeing everyone the entity had ever trapped. I pressed the key against the fake Marcus's forehead, and the moment the metal touched its skin, the entire interdimensional chamber began to collapse. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because what happened when that chamber collapsed changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone who had ever been trapped in room 237. The trapped souls weren't screaming anymore. They were singing. A chorus of voices raised in joy and relief as they felt their stolen identities being returned to them. The fake Marcus beneath me was dissolving, its stolen features melting away to reveal nothing but empty air. But the chamber was collapsing around us, and I realized that freeing the trapped souls meant destroying the interdimensional space that held them. We were all going to die in the collapse, unless I could find a way to get everyone back to the real world. That's when I understood the true purpose of the brass key. It wasn't just a key to room 237. It was a key to the boundary between dimensions, a way to open a door back to reality. I held the key high above my head as the chamber disintegrated around us, and I screamed with every ounce of strength I had left. "Open the door home!" The key exploded with light, and suddenly we were all falling. Hundreds of souls plummeting through dimensional space toward the real world, toward life, toward freedom. I hit the ground hard, gasping and choking, and opened my eyes to find myself lying on the burgundy carpet in the hallway outside room 237. The door to the room was standing open, revealing a perfectly normal hotel room with no signs of supernatural activity. But I wasn't alone in the hallway. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because what I saw in that corridor proved that my confrontation with the entity had worked. Paragraph 5. The consequences. Resolution, trauma, and reflection. 2,000 words. There were people everywhere. Dozens of men, women, and children, all wearing clothing from different time periods, all looking around in confusion and wonder as they found themselves back in the real world after decades of supernatural imprisonment. A man in a 1950s business suit was examining his hands as if he couldn't believe they were solid again. A woman in a 1980s power dress was crying tears of joy as she touched her own face. A little girl in a 1990s school uniform was spinning in circles, laughing with pure delight at the sensation of movement and freedom. They were all the people who had been trapped by the entity over the past century, and they were all real again, all freed from the interdimensional collection that had held their souls prisoner. But as I watched them celebrating their liberation, I noticed something that made my heart sink. They were all translucent, like ghosts or projections. They had been returned to the real world, but they were no longer fully alive in the way that I was. An elderly man in a 1960s suit approached me, his eyes filled with gratitude despite his spectral appearance. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying across dimensions. We've been waiting so long for someone brave enough to free us. What happens to you now? I asked, struggling to sit up on the hallway carpet. We go home, he replied with a smile. Not to our physical homes. Those are long gone for most of us. But to whatever comes after this life. The entity kept us trapped between worlds, unable to move on. You've given us permission to complete our journey. One by one, the freed souls began to fade away, each of them stopping to nod or smile at me before disappearing into whatever lay beyond the physical world. The little girl was the last to go, and she waved at me with a child's innocent joy before becoming just a shimmer in the air, then nothing at all. I was alone in the hallway again, but it felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed down the second floor was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and normalcy that I hadn't felt since arriving at the hotel. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because the psychological aftermath of a supernatural encounter is something no one can prepare you for. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely use my phone, but I managed to call the front desk. Margaret answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting for my call. Mr. Thompson, are you all right? I think so. The entity is gone. I freed everyone who was trapped. There was a long pause, then, you did it. You actually did it. In 96 years of operation, you're the first guest who ever fought back successfully. 96 years, but the hotel was built in 1923. That's over 100 years. The entity arrived in 1928, Mr. Thompson. It took its first guest in room 237 that year, and it's been feeding ever since. We've been waiting for someone strong enough to break the cycle. The implications of what she was saying slowly sank in. You knew this would happen. You knew what room 237 was when you gave me the key. We've been hoping for someone like you for decades. Someone who wouldn't give up their identity without a fight. The cab drivers, the room service staff, all of us who work here. We've all been trying to warn guests, trying to prepare someone for this confrontation. I felt a surge of anger that cut through my exhaustion. You used me as bait. You deliberately put me in danger. Mr. Thompson, Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. We put you in the position to be a hero. Every person who worked at this hotel, everyone who tried to warn guests about room 237, we were all trapped here too. The entity's influence extended to everyone who worked within its territory. We couldn't leave, couldn't quit, couldn't truly interfere. But we could hope that someday someone would be strong enough to free all of us. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because I realized that my ordeal had been about more than just my own survival. I walked to the window at the end of the hallway and looked outside. Chicago was back. The downtown skyline glittered in the early morning light. Cars moved through the streets, and people walked on the sidewalks going about their normal Friday morning routines. The hotel had returned to the real world, and life was continuing as if nothing had happened. But I knew that everything had changed, not just for me, but for everyone who had been touched by the entity's influence over the past century. I went back to room 237 and stood in the doorway. It looked exactly like a normal hotel room again. Clean, comfortable, and completely ordinary. The mahogany desk where I'd seen the fake version of myself was just a desk. The mirror that had shown me shadowy figures was just a mirror. The bathroom where I'd heard running water and seen ghostly hands was just a bathroom. But I could still smell that faint metallic scent, still feel the echo of supernatural cold in the air. Room 237 would always carry the memory of what had happened there, even if the entity was gone. I packed my belongings quickly, eager to leave the Riverside Grand Hotel and return to my normal life. But as I was closing my suitcase, I found something that hadn't been there before. A small, leather-bound journal with my name embossed on the cover. Inside, written in my own handwriting, was a detailed account of everything that had happened in room 237. Every conversation, every supernatural manifestation, every moment of terror. It was all there, recorded in perfect detail, but I had never written any of it. The final entry, written in handwriting that was mine but somehow more confident than my usual script, read, "The entity is destroyed, but the knowledge of what happened must be preserved. Others need to know that supernatural threats exist and that they can be overcome. The story of room 237 is my responsibility to tell. Comment below what you think really happened, because I realized that my experience had given me more than just survival. It had given me a purpose. Over the next few weeks, as I returned to my normal life in Denver, I began to understand the full scope of what had happened to me. The supernatural encounter had changed me in ways that went beyond psychological trauma. I found myself more confident, more decisive, more willing to take risks and stand up for what I believed in. I asked out the woman from accounting, and we had a wonderful dinner together. I negotiated that promotion I'd been chasing, approaching my boss with a level of self-assurance I'd never possessed before. I started calling my mom twice a week instead of just Sundays, because I'd learned how precious those connections really were. But I also found myself drawn to stories of unexplained phenomena, supernatural encounters, and places where the boundary between our world and the unknown had grown thin. The journal that had appeared in my suitcase wasn't just a record of what had happened, it was the beginning of a larger calling. I started researching other locations like Room 237, other entities that fed on human fear and identity. I discovered that the supernatural world was vast and complex, filled with both malevolent forces and benevolent spirits, and that most people had no idea how close they lived to the edge of the unknown. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because I learned that I wasn't the only person who had encountered something beyond normal reality. The psychological impact of my experience in Room 237 has never fully faded. I still have moments of doubt, times when I question whether I'm really myself or just a very sophisticated duplicate created by the entity. I still check mirrors more carefully, still pay attention to unexplained temperature changes, still listen for whispers in empty rooms. But I've also learned to trust my own sense of identity in ways I never did before. The entity tried to convince me that it could be me better than I could be myself, but the experience taught me that authenticity, even flawed, frightened, imperfect authenticity, is more powerful than any supernatural mimicry. The Riverside Grand Hotel still operates in downtown Chicago, and Room 237 is still available for guests. But according to my research, no one has reported any supernatural activity there since that October night in 2024. The entity is gone, the trapped souls have been freed, and the room has returned to being just a room. Margaret still works at the front desk, but when I called the hotel a few months later to ask about her experience, she told me something that gave me chills. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I've been working here for over 30 years, but I don't remember anything unusual about Room 237. Are you sure you have the right hotel? Let me know if you want a part 2 to this story, because I realized that my memories of that night might be the only record that any of it ever happened." The supernatural world has a way of covering its tracks, of making people forget experiences that challenge their understanding of reality. But some people who have been changed by direct contact with the unknown, retain their memories even when everyone else forgets. I am one of those people now. I am a witness to the fact that there are forces in this world that exist beyond our normal understanding, entities that feed on human consciousness, and places where the boundary between dimensions grows dangerously thin. But I'm also living proof that these forces can be defeated. That ordinary people, armed with nothing but determination and an absolute refusal to surrender their identity, can overcome supernatural threats and free others from spiritual imprisonment. The brass key from Room 237 is still in my possession. It sits on my desk at home in Denver, a reminder of that night and a tool for future encounters with the unknown. Because I've learned that my experience in Room 237 wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. There are other rooms like 237 in hotels around the world, other entities that prey on travelers, other supernatural traps disguised as ordinary accommodations. And there are people who need someone to fight for them, someone who understands that the battle between human identity and supernatural parasites is ongoing. If this story gave you goosebumps, smash that like button and subscribe for more terrifying, true supernatural experiences. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when I share these real encounters with the unknown. And if you ever find yourself in a hotel room that feels wrong, if you ever encounter something that claims it can live your life better than you can, remember what I learned in Room 237. You are irreplaceable. Your identity is unique and valuable, and no supernatural entity has the right to steal what makes you who you are. The fight for human authenticity in a world filled with unknown forces is never over, but it's a fight worth having, and it's a fight that can be won. Room 237 is empty now, but the lesson it taught me will last forever. In the battle between human identity and supernatural parasites, the most powerful weapon you possess is the absolute certainty of who you are. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that the impossible can happen, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to surrender to fear. And remember, if you ever check into a hotel room and something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Your life, your identity, and your soul are worth fighting for. Stay safe, stay authentic, and never forget that you are irreplaceable.